if you want to use the React.js library on the front end of your web application, that is to say a non-Next.js application, then you have some choices to make for your front end bundler and development server. You could certainly use standalone Webpack and set up, configure, and maintain Webpack yourself, in which case may Taylor Swift have mercy on your soul. You could use the Create-React-App command line interface, which is just an abstraction for Webpack, but just as slow as Webpack. You could use something like Snowpack. Oh wait, Snowpack is dead, and they recommend using Vite.js instead. LOL. You could use Parcel, which promises zero configuration, but slow performance in actuality. Another popular option these days is Vite, which requires a much smaller amount of configuration when compared with Webpack, but it's much faster than the other options. Just a quick dose of reality. Parcel has 162,665 weekly downloads as of September 8th, 2023. Vite has 6,114,327 weekly downloads in the same time frame. The Vite React plugin itself, which is to say Vite just for React, has 2,582,535 weekly downloads in the same time frame. In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up a local developer environment using the VS Code integrated development environment with React and Vite. We will also have ESLint and Prettier as an ESLint rule. This setup could be used as a template for your React Vite development environment for your development team. The ESLint configuration will be very basic so that you can add to it as needed. And if you have developers on your team that do not use VS Code, I have something for them as well. Let's start in VS Code's integrated terminal or whichever terminal you wish to use. Initialize an NPM project by running the command npm init-y to accept the default. This will generate the standard package.json for us. And then at the root of your directory, create a folder named src, which stands for source. Inside of this source directory, create a file called index.html. At this point, we have a basic package.json file, and then we have the index.html file that we just generated. Let's go ahead and use Emmet to generate the HTML file for us. Let's call it React with Vite.js starter template because that's what it is. Now let's do all of the standard React things. Let's generate a div with the ID of root for React to work with. And then for our entry point, we'll call it app.jsx for our entry point. Now, if you notice here on the script tag on line number 10, I've added the type equals module. Now, this is not part of standard React if you were using the CRA. But we need to declare the type attribute in the script tag and assign the value of module for Vite to work with. Let's begin installing NPM packages that are development dependencies. We have several, but I would like to start out with Vite and the Vite React plugin. Please take note of the NPM version number. So we are installing Vite at 4.4.9 and the Vite React plugin at 4.0.4. The reason why I'm having you install this at this time because as of September 10th, these versions are known to work. And I am trying to help you to create a Vite React template instead of having to track down the latest version of this package or that package. That could be handled later. But at the time of this recording, this is stable. These versions are stable and are guaranteed to work. At the root of your directory, create a JavaScript file called vite.config.js. This will be where we place the Vite configurations. As a reminder, if you want to dig into the nitty-gritty of what these NPM packages do, you can certainly open up a browser, use your favorite search engine, go straight to the NPM package itself and read up on it, or you can certainly go to the GitHub repo and do some research and look at the documentation on how to configure what I'm about to show you how to do. Like I've mentioned earlier in the video, there is a tiny bit of configuration for Vite to work with React. First, we need to import the define config module from Vite. Next, we are going to import the Vite for React plugin provided to us by React. Then we are going to export default the configuration definition. Let's pull in the plugins. And in this case, we are invoking React, right? We're calling React here with the parens. And then we are going to specify where our root directory lives. In my case, or in our case, it is the source directory. And inside of that source directory, there's a file called index.html. Okay, source. And because we, on line 10, in the script tag, we gave it the type module attribute, Vite, along with the React plugin provided by Vite, it will look for this file and add it to the graph so that Vite can do its work with React. We are done with setting up the vite.config.js file. However, we are not quite done with setting up Vite yet. There's one tiny step left. But before we do that last step, let's go ahead and install React. So if you notice here again, I am specifying a specific version of React in the React DOM. At the time of this recording, the version of React that works with all of the NPM packages is React 18.2.0, which at this time is the latest production version of React. That is not the canary version or the beta version. So now we have React as our production dependency. So in the package.json file on line 7, off screen, I've added the key value pair of dev as the key and vite as the value. I added that so that we can run the command npm run dev to fire up the Vite server, the local development server with React. Now you can call this key whatever you like, but the value has to be Vite. Because why? Because when we imported this Vite package as a dev dependency, right? Now let's go ahead and create our standard React application. So in the source folder or directory, add an app.jsx file. Now you may wish to add an index file here if you like, but in my case, to keep things concise, I went ahead and created an app.jsx file. One important thing to note is that in Vite application, a file that is a component, a file that is a React component, has to have the suffix .jsx. Otherwise, it will not work. Really, that's the best practice anyways. If you work with TypeScript and React in the past, you know that TypeScript enforces the .tsx suffix on any React file that is a component. So conceptually, it's the same thing in Vite. If you also notice that the formatting is off, I did that for a reason, so that later on in this video, we are going to add ESLint and we are going to add Prettier as an ESLint rule to fix all of this. So line 1 is standard React 18 stuff. You have to import the proper module from the React DOM client. Line 3 is standard React stuff, along with line 4. Line 6, I am declaring my love for bacon. I apologize if you're a vegetarian. And then line 11 to 13 is standard, very standard React 18 stuff. Okay, so now we have a component to test the Vite local dev server with. Let's go ahead and run the npm dev command. As you can see, it's starting up. It's very fast, and it's running on port 5173. Vite will always listen to port 5173 in localhost in your dev server. Let's check my love for bacon. It renders, and it is a React component. Let's make sure. Yep. Okay. Now that we've completed setting up React in Vite, let's install more NPM development dependencies packages for ESLint and Prettier. Please note that I am having you install specific package version that I know is guaranteed to work with the rest of the NPM packages, specifically for React, React DOM, and Vite. These packages are not just for VS Code, but rather for any development environment. We will be installing VS Code extensions for Prettier and ESLint to improve quality of life for developers later in the video. So in my humble opinion, the naming convention of these NPM packages are rather self-explanatory, with the possible exception of this one here, the JSX-A11Y package. Essentially, this package does a static evaluation of the JSX that React uses and spot potential accessibility issue for the visually impaired in our React app. If you wish to learn more about that particular package, you can go to their NPM site here. Before we configure our VS Code settings file, we are going to create two more configuration files at the root of the app's directory. Please create a .eslintrc.json file. Now this ESLint.rc file can be in multiple formats, but I choose the .json format only because I'm used to working with that format. Leave that blank for now. Please create a prettierrc file, and let's go ahead and create a very simple configuration object for Prettier. For now, I just have two rules for the purposes of demonstration. Of course, this configuration can be anything that you like. When it comes to setting the configuration of VS Code, we can go about it in one of two ways. We can open up the settings by using the VS Code drop-down menus and then going to settings, or you can just press Command plus the comma on a Mac, and it'll take you to this sort of like GUI here to where we can search for the settings. For example, format on save. Please check this format on save box if you haven't done so already. The other option is to click on the Open Settings JSON, and it will give us a JSON object of what the settings are currently, and we can add to this or we can modify this. I will include in the GitHub repo for this tutorial the recommended settings that I have. For example, format on save should be true. The default formatter will be Prettier. Again, we will use Prettier as an ESLint rule. So Prettier and ESLint will work in conjunction with each other. This is not necessarily required, but I highly recommend it, which is to update the imports when we move file around. If we were to move a file out of this folder for whatever reason, or if we were to have subfolders in here and we need to move that around, it'll update it for us. Now, I had you create a Prettier configuration file earlier because of this rule here on line 5. Prettier require config true. So only apply our Prettier rule only if there is a config file, this file here. The reason for that is if we were to open another code repo, another project in VS Code, we might not necessarily want our rules to apply to that separate code file. So that's why I've enabled this rule. This is highly recommended for Prettier. Not necessarily, but highly recommended. These last two rules are for my terminal so that I can match the look of my VS Code terminal with my regular Mac terminal. Please open the eslintrc.json file. Create an empty object if you haven't done so already. Now, please understand that you can spend hours upon hours in here setting up your configs. I'm just going to show you how to configure the minimum amount just to be effective. so that you can get going with your React and Vite projects quickly. If you wish to go down the rabbit hole of linting for JavaScript, TypeScript, you can go to here and get lost in the documentation if you wish to do so. So I think the easiest and the fastest way to teach you this is for me to go ahead and paste in the properties for each configuration. And then I'm going to go back and explain what each of these configuration is for, and then paste in the individual configuration for each one of these properties. So please go ahead and have this inside of your ESLint.rc file. The extends property can take one string that specified a certain configuration. For example, ESLint recommended or ESLint all, or like in our case, an array of string that extends some of the plugins that we downloaded from NPM earlier. So I'll paste in these strings in our array. So we are going to go with the ESLint recommended. And then if you recall earlier, when we downloaded the individual NPM plugins, we are going to specify that. If you recall, we downloaded the import, the React one, the A11Y, and Prettier. Now I will tell you that for extend, Prettier has to be the last one. I'll repeat that. In this array of string, in the extends property, Prettier has to be the last element inside of this array. And since we're specifying the plugins down here, let's go ahead and add those plugins now. Okay, so the plugin here for import, that's our import. React, there's a React. A11Y, there's our A11Y, and of course Prettier. Prettier has to go last. A rule in the context of ESLint is the accepted principle for front-end codes that is generally accepted by the industry. Now you can agree with them or not agree with them, but generally they are what is accepted within the JavaScript ecosystem in the industry. I've mentioned earlier in the video that we are going to be using Prettier as our ESLint rule. Now, you could configure your own rules in here. It could be quite exhaustive, perhaps exhaustive to maintain. But there are two rules in here that I want to disable, and they are antiquated rules that should be disabled in modern React shop. Prop types and React and JSX, which is not even a thing anymore since React 17. Of course, we are at 18.2 now. And prop types in modern shop is kind of useless. It doesn't really do anything. You want types, use TypeScript. Because there are multiple versions of JavaScript and multiple versions of JavaScript runtimes, ESLint gives us the parser option configuration property to use. Let me paste in the sub key value pairs and explain. So for ECMA version or JavaScript version, I went with the latest, but here you can specify ECMAScript or ES 6, 7, 8, 9, or 2020, 2021, what have you. For source type, because I'm using ES6 plus or ES6 or newer, how does ES6 import via module, right? As opposed to say require.js. And for ECMAScript feature, because I'm working within the context of a React app, I specify JSX to be true because React uses JSX by default. The env property or the environmental property gives us a predefined global variable. And I'm going to define 3 because this is a front-end application. I'm going to specify the browser to be true. And we need Node to run the whole thing, so that's going to be true. And for the JavaScript version, I set it to the latest version. Specify, because I set the latest up here, the latest as of this time is ES 2024. And so therefore, I'm setting that to true. Of note is that if you set line 15 ECMA version to ES6, then this should be set to ES6 as well, because this will have a higher priority over this value here. The settings property is settings for our plugins. And because this is a React application, we're going to specify React, remember, because we use React as a plugin up here. And for version, we are asking ESLint to detect the version of React in the package.json file. In this case, it's 18.2. Now, there's one more part to this plugin settings, and that is the import resolver for React. And of course, we're using Node, right, inside of this configuration for our React application. So we specify Node.js, and the extension will be .js for JavaScript file in the root directory, and .jsx for the component, for our React component. In terms of configuring the .eslintrc file, we are done. You might have noticed that down here, Prettier was showing up red earlier. If that happens to you, go ahead and restart VS Code for our configuration file to take effect. I did mention earlier that we were going to add some additional scripts command for teammates that are not using VS Code. To save a little bit of time, I did this offline. So let me explain what's going on here. Let me start with line number 9, the build command. Build, of course, to build our front-end project. This could be used as part of your CI/CD pipeline. But Vite gives us a build preview command to use. The preview command will show you what files will be generated by running the build command. Obviously, in your CI/CD pipeline, you do not want this, but it's useful for CI/CD in that you want to know what will be inside of your built folder after the build command has been ran. And then the format and lint command will format JavaScript, JSX, CSS, and Sass file for us to make sure that the indentation is correct. And then for linting, we will detect any anomaly in our JavaScript files. Refer to the ESLint documentation for additional flags that you can add to this command. To test this formatting command from the command line, I went ahead and I disabled the format on save in VS Code setting just temporarily so we can test this. So off screen, I added a component called confetti, which will display confetti in the browser in a style.css file. And in the files itself, in the JSX component, I intentionally messed up the formatting. See, I remove all of the tabs. Let's open up a terminal. Let's run the format command, npm run format. Okay, and it should come in here and fix our formatting for us and then save the file, which it does. Now let's test the linting. Okay, it's telling me I have an error in app.js. So I commented out the import statement, and in the IDE itself is showing what the error is. Save that. And it's telling me I have an error in confetti. Let's go to confetti. Oops, looks like I commented that out too, the import statement. Save that. Let's run it again. Okay, so now we're good. And I flip the format on save back to true. Let me sure everything else is still working. Save. Okay, it's going to format on save. That's already formatted. Okay, good. The only thing left to do now is to run the app itself. Again, Vite listens to port 5173. Let's go to the browser. Let's party. There's our confetti. Let's make sure there's no errors. It's pretty quick, as you can see. I've added, well, I will be adding a GitHub repo for this tutorial in the description. If you notice here, I've removed all the caret in front of the package version number so that when you pull this down, you're going to get the exact version that I know is guaranteed to work. In the future, if you were to do an NPM upgrade, then you would have to resolve the circular dependencies. It's not just the nature of front-end development with JavaScript and NPM. It's not specifically related to Vite or React. And again, if you ever have insomnia, you can always come here and read the documentation for ESLint. Okay, my friends, thank you for listening to me. I hope you use this starter template for React with Vite. If you do, please consider giving this repo a star. And if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe to my channel. And if you are already a subscriber, I thank you. And please give it a like. Thank you so much.